If you've watched this channel for a while, you'll know that when it comes to Call of Duty, I'm probably one of the more critical voices. And a lot of that's to do with the fact that over the last 3 to 4 years, I've had to fall out of love with Warzone, with terrible updates that have broken stability, poor decision from the development teams, and also just generally one of the worst anti-cheat iterations I think we've seen in a game of this magnitude. And because of all of that, I was not very hopeful for Season 3 at all. In fact, I expected it to follow the very same Call of Duty fashion of just being a broken update that maybe added a couple of guns and didn't do much else. In fact, I was near 90% confident it would come with a bunch of crashes and stability issues. But honestly, I think it's the most impressed I've been with almost any Call of Duty update over the last 4 to 5 years, and I think it's the best update Warzone has had to date. The return to Verdansk is so much more than just adding the map back to the game. It's a return to what made Warzone a much better title, which was a sandbox environment first, a battle royale second, and a fun experience being the front hold of everything that you do. It's more of a return to a Warzone experience that isn't overly focused on the sweatiest of gameplay mechanics and movement systems, and gameplay loops that overly complicate the experience and just make it less fun for everyone involved. Now, there were some decisions in Season 3 that, on paper, I was worried about. This reversion that we're seeing to Verdansk is a full slide back to the very early 2020 days, so much so that I'm seeing people complaining on social media about things like plate economies, lack of cash, the fact that they don't get their loadout instantly, how hard it is to rotate. And that's the reality of what Verdansk used to be, a brutal, methodical, but fun battle royale experience. And what's really great about this reversion to Verdansk is that there's also been some thoughtful revision to Verdansk as well. The lighting system is infinitely better than anything we've had before and makes identifying players substantially easier. The vast majority of trees around the map have been widened so that you can actually use them as physical cover as a character, which was never a thing in the previous iterations. Various goat paths and climbing trails have been added to lots of slopes and hills that were previously inaccessible or often sources of frustration for the majority of players. Both going back to what Verdansk was as a map, but also rolling back Call of Duty's gameplay, mechanics, and systems, stripping away lootable perks, stripping away pieces of equipment that were jarring, changing the Omni movement system, and completely rebalancing the cash, plate, team play mechanics, and flow of Call of Duty Warzone has brought the game into what I think is a phenomenal spot. I genuinely believe right now that Warzone is a fun experience again, and I would honestly give it an 8 out of 10, possibly even a 9 out of 10 if some other things start going their way. To start with, the map itself. Verdansk is a pretty good map. You know, it's not the best map I think Warzone has produced. I think that crown still belongs to Al Mazrah in my personal opinion, but it's a good map with memorable points of interest and the very thoughtful touches up to lighting and some of the small changes that they've made to the area feels faithful to the map that we played, but gives it a little bit more depth in places that I think needed it. Straight off the board, that has been a 10 out of 10 experience, and I think they've done a really great job of honoring what Verdansk was. And adding the Ascenders in the mid-season update that allow you to use zip lines up the sides of certain buildings is going to be a welcomed addition as well. But the biggest part of this experience for me is that these POIs are so well built up that the flow of gameplay feels great. We have a system that doesn't rely on these god-awful redeploy balloons and redeploy ziplines, which I hope never return to Call of Duty again, and instead thoughtful transitions between POI and POI, with vehicles moving on foot, and often just getting caught out in the open. This means that everything has a bit more of a risk factor to it, and the BR experience feels more like Battle Royale because you're not randomly having 4 dudes land on the roof of your building, you're having these brutal engagements as you move to and fro from different points. And that is what made Verdansk brilliant, and I'm really glad to see it back. The overall map experience as a whole has been completely complemented by a slightly more limited cash economy and a substantially more limited plate economy as well. Only being allowed to carry 5 plates and then only being able to have 8 if you get a satchel is a good experience because it means you have to think about everything a little bit more. You need to think about looting more frequently. You need to think about, do I carry a munitions box or a plate box? You need to think about, okay, as a team, how are we dividing up our cash? And because you have a little bit more downtime, because Verdansk is a big map and doesn't have terrible redeploy balloons and respawn mechanics that mean that 75,000 people are diving on you constantly, you get this really nice methodical experience returning to Warzone. Downtime should not be treated as a dirty word in a battle royale, and that is the problem that Warzone has created as a result of listening to sweats like myself, who didn't have a ranked experience and ended up pushing the pub's experience into competitive hell. Now in Warzone, we're going back to being able to mess around with your friends a little bit more, having a bit more of a time to have a conversation with somebody in your team, or having a conversation with your squad or party. Having a few more moments to think about the transitions you want to make, how you're going to do them, and what the best position for you to be might be. It is a very faithful return to what Battle Royale should have been, which is a fun, thoughtful, and methodical sandbox first, and a BR second. And if we're talking about it being a BR, it needs to actually be a Battle Royale. You shouldn't have to have 7,000 redeploy tokens, redeploy flares, gulag kits, and all of these opportunities to turn Battle Royale into essentially Resurgence. The best format of BR is the brutal experience, because it makes everything feel more rewarding. Everything feels more valuable. You know, getting a win in Verdansk feels rewarding. You know, getting kills can feel risky, and the tension and sort of brilliance of each of those individual moments, in my opinion, have returned to the game. In Urzikstan, it was like, sweet, I just got 10 kills and I, bought some shit and I died and I didn't quite win. Nothing felt valuable or meaningful because every time you died, you just went to the gulag, came back and bought another gulag kit. That's not the case anymore. Everything feels a bit more high stakes, and I think that's what audiences wanted this whole time. Now let's talk about some of the more flagrantly controversial changes, and these are things that I flagged as well. And the first one is the movement system being changed. And honestly, if you like Black Ops 6's Omni movement, you're not going to be disappointed, because the new Warzone movement that we have now is essentially Black Ops 6's Omni movement, but without it feeling forced or required and feeling substantially less slippery. Now, the big issue I find with Omni movement is that once you get into gunfights, you've got guys doing 360 backflips like a salmon, in and out of every gunfight, and it just ends up being this weird Beyblade-y style system that doesn't quite work very well. But with these changes that slow you down a little bit and make it a little bit more grounded, it kind of feels like the fights are over in a more comfortable time frame that I think benefits everyone. Omni movement isn't something that you necessarily need in the game anymore, but it is something that if you're a high-skill player, you can make use of to get out of sticky situations. I think it's literally in the perfect spot. It's big enough that there is enough of a skill gap for players to make things happen, but there's also just not too much of a skill gap that the average player is feeling alienated by the movement system. The next one for me is the time to kill, and this was definitely a concern I had early on, and arguably it's still a little bit of a concern for me. I'm willing to give this new lethality and slightly reduced skill gap a go on the basis that I just genuinely believe it's what the vast majority of players will enjoy. The old school Verdansk days did have really brutal time to kills, and they had substantially less movement and mechanics for you to actually escape that as well, so it was a brutal experience. Now we have Omni movement, smoke grenades have started becoming a bit more of a meta, the stim system has been returned to some extent, and there are more options to getting out of certain gunfights and situations that you didn't have before. Now, granted, I still think the time to kill is a little bit too fast and too lethal in some places, and I do think that you do die a little too quickly, but at the same time, it does mean that more average players who aren't bang out sweats and literally comp demons are actually able to enjoy the experience. It means gunfights are over in what I would consider to be a healthy and acceptable time frame. And also, most importantly, guns just feel a bit more lethal, which is great, I think. Honestly, just having a bit more lethality to what you're using isn't a bad thing, and it kind of pushes the game in a direction of prioritizing positioning over prioritizing full sending entire squads whenever you want, because you're going to end up winning. The system we have now means that an average or mediocre team who don't have guys who are playing 5-6 hours a day can very comfortably beat a team who are religiously playing the game if they just make better rotations, better decisions, and better positioning than them. And I think that's what a BR should be. There's a level playing field to be had here, and quite frankly, if we want a wider skill gap, ranked play exists for that. and it will be coming in Season 3 Reloaded, and we shouldn't be forcing ranked and competitive style changes on a non-competitive audience. Right now, I honestly feel like Warzone is in a really healthy spot where the average player who hasn't played in a while can go back to the game, have a good time, and genuinely enjoy themselves. There are a couple of decisions I still disagree with. The AMAX, the HDR, and some of these other assets just sort of being locked behind these arbitrary battle pass systems or certain screens that you have to check out or events tabs. That just seems tedious to me. It should have just been unlocked for everyone. But for the vast majority of players, you can just dive in and have a good time. And Call of Duty, in my view, really needs to build upon this by not fundamentally changing how the game works or trying to cater towards sweats and streamers and comp players. What they need to do is inject more fun. Bring back things like Juggernaut Royale or Armored Royale. Bring back these wacky LTMs to the Verdansk experience that made it more chaotic, more fun, and just added random elements to the game that people could enjoy. Limited time modes are something we have been sorely missing throughout the entire Warzone experience for the last year or so, and whilst Resurgence to some extent I guess counts even if you put it on Verdansk, the reality is that most people want something that just adds an injection of fun, just adds some chaos to the mix that makes it lots of fun. And that's what I loved about the original Juggernaut Royale experience. Watching 10 Juggernauts have a fight in the final circle was just cool. It was just fun to do. So you might be wondering, what about things that could improve? And I'm going to take a slightly different approach to this. And I'm going to say that I don't have anything in the way of improvements to add right now, because I don't think anybody should be talking about improvements right now. My big issue with what some people are doing right now when they talk about the Verdansk experience and when they talk about Warzone is that they're complaining about things without adapting their gameplay. Cash flow is limited, yes, but in the original Verdansk, you actually had to work and go and get contracts in order to get money, and then multiply your contracts and do a few of them to get more cash, which meant that you were running into more teams more frequently, and contracts had a really great way of making teams move around the map and encounter each other more naturally. You're not going to find $20 bajillion in crates, and it never was that way, and it never should be that way. The plating situation. Yes, I could agree that there might need to be a few more plates here and there, but the whole point of having a limited plate economy is that you can't just mad lad rush everybody whenever you so please. There has to be a decision process, a plate sharing process, and thinking behind what you're doing. So honestly, my feedback for Verdansk, other than maybe making vehicles a little bit faster in terms of acceleration, because I still think they could be just a touch better, is just not to listen to anybody. Leave the experience as it is for 3 or 4 weeks and force people to adapt to the original reversion of Verdansk before changing absolutely anything. This is possibly the first license I've given Call of Duty in however long at this point to do nothing, because I genuinely feel as though doing nothing is the way to go forward. We don't want resurgence in Battle Royale. We don't want infinite cash in Battle Royale. We want brutal BR gameplay that feels rewarding and feels demanding without necessarily being competitively over the top. And the balance that they have found in this update right now, I honestly think is perfect. It could do with a few minor tweaks, but doing anything substantial that could change the flow of gameplay would drag us back into the competitive sweatfest that has turned so many players away from the Verdansk experience. The only other objectively good change I think they could make for everybody is just fixing some of the skins, like the Terminator skin, which is still far too dark and far too hard to see. But don't change things. Don't get rid of one-shot snipers again. Don't start adding redeploy balloons back into the game because sweats are upset that they can't drop 75 bajillion kills a game. Give this iteration and faithful rendition of Verdansk time to breathe and time for people to enjoy it, improvise, adapt, and get used to this gameplay system that now exists. The Achilles heel to absolutely all of this entire update, is simply the anti-cheat. It is the only weak component of Warzone that I feel is currently left right now, and even the servers have actually felt surprisingly responsive, and I will be investigating if there has been any upgrades in that department. For me right now, I've encountered 3 cheaters in the space of 2 8 or 6 hour days, give or take, on Warzone, and those 3 cheaters all got banned after being reported. 2 of them got banned in the match that we reported them in. The a third got banned the match after. And so far, that's a pretty good conversion rate. It could be worse for some people. I'm sure our experiences and mileages across my entire audience has varied. But so far, it seems like Ricochet is being responsive in places, and that has to maintain that or get better. We can't let cheaters take over this again, and if we end up in a situation where cheaters are dominating the field, we need to turn off crossplay for the vast majority of the audience. So folks, I'm interested to hear your thoughts and feelings in Verdansk down below. If you're a casual player, somebody who's stuck an hour or two into Verdansk here or there in the evenings, what are your thoughts and feelings? Because I don't care what people who play this game religiously hours a day think. I really want to know what the average Warzone player is feeling right now, and whether or not this is something that they're enjoying. Let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comment section down below, and I'll see you again in the next one.